Welcome to Money Market, a Bank of Tampa podcast. We highlight the businesses, expert business advice, local economy, and points of interest in the Tampa Bay market. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your finer podcast. And please share this episode with a friend or colleague. I'm your host, Owen LaFave, the Pinellas County Market President for the Bank of Tampa, Tampa Bay's oldest and largest community bank. Today, we're joined by my colleague and counterpart, Scott Gault, the Hillsborough County Market President for the Bank of Tampa, to talk about the high-flying world of aviation lending and other luxury purchases if we've got time to get to it. So Scott has over 30 years experience in bringing extensive expertise in commercial lending, but also in aviation finance, where you were an expert in previous roles, which we'll get into that. But Scott, can you talk a little bit about your aviation background and then just general banking background, kind of what positions you've held? 30 years experience is a long time. I'm sure you touched a little everything.
I have. So prior to coming to the Bank of Tampa, I was financing aircraft was my primary role at a couple of different organizations I worked for, and did that for almost 20 years or so. Anything from commercial airliners, engines that go on commercial airliners, to corporate aircraft.
Okay, good stuff. So we are here to talk about the ins and outs of aviation finance. Why own a charter plane versus...
So as far as owning a plane versus chartering an aircraft, or just going on commercial airliners. Once you go on a corporate aircraft, private aircraft, you really see why it's called a business tool. You can get on a corporate aircraft, say a CEO, CFO has to fly to Minneapolis. They're based here in Florida. They've got a young family. I mean, think about it. They can fly up to Minneapolis, have their meetings, and be back for dinner with the kids or with the wife and kids that night.
Sure.
Most of the planes now are outfitted with the technology we have these days. They're outfitted so well. It's really a mobile office in the sky is really what it comes down to. So you can function just like you were in the office, go take a meeting somewhere, anywhere in the country or the world, and then be back into your home headquarters that evening if you want to. So that's really why we call it a business tool these days, because it truly is for the traveling CEO, CFO. They want to be home. They want to have that work-life balance, and this helps out a great deal.
The control, you're not waiting in line. You can go whenever you want to, walk right out on the tarmac and take off. I can imagine just the flexibility is great. So one of our clients at some point in time, and I was telling the story earlier, we were financing a piece of property here in Memphis and Nashville, and I had intended on staying in Nashville for the weekend. And so he had asked when I was going, and I told him, and he's like, "Well, that's great." He's like, "I'll pick you up at 8." He's like, "We'll have you home by 4." Mm-hmm. So I didn't get to experience Nashville. I stayed in Tampa that weekend, but the flexibility is incredible.
Mm-hmm. It is. And then, like you alluded to, ever since 9/11. Security has completely changed. Air travel has completely changed, and this has helped out tremendously, helping people stay on their calendars and their schedules for the day, not having to go through the commercial security zones.
So, and a lot of owners put them into a charter pool when they're not using them. Is that fair?
Yes, for the most part, what they're going to do is they're going to have somebody manage the aircraft for them. So a fixed-based operator or FBO is going to typically manage the aircraft for an owner or for a corporation, and they typically have what's called a 135 charter certificate, which allows that person or that company to charter the aircraft out to other individuals, which can help defray costs.
Sure, makes sense. So why own and not lease?
10, 15, 20 years ago, leasing was much more prevalent on aircraft. And then really over the last 10, 15 years, it's shifted from being a leased asset to folks and corporations wanted to own it. They wanted to have it on the balance sheet. The off-balance sheet treatment kind of went away. It doesn't make as much tax sense anymore to lease an aircraft. Now, if you're in, say, the air ambulance business, where it's truly just a workhorse where that aircraft is only flying for business, it may make sense to lease it. But if you're doing it for corporate travel, personal type of travel, it makes a lot more sense to own the aircraft these days.
And you can take advantage of things like depreciation.
Exactly.
Exactly. So walk us through a typical end-to-end process so people understand. This is a major purchase. Maybe not for Jeff Bezos, but for most people, this is a pretty significant purchase, maybe secondary to a home. But walk us through the process.
So first and foremost, you want to have your financing lined up, because these transactions, they go down very quickly. Once you find that aircraft that you fall in love with, it's almost like buying a home, but you want it even faster because you want to be able to get on that plane and start traveling with it. So what I recommend to people is have your financing lined up beforehand. So when you find an aircraft that you fall in love with, you can immediately start moving forward with that. And the brokers that sell these aircraft, they want these transactions to move quickly because typically there's a lot of money in it for them. They want to make sure they have a real live buyer before they're turning anybody else away. So that's what I tell most people right away. Get your financing lined up. Have some sort of pre-approval in place.
Okay, so you want people to come to the bank before they're going out shopping for their
That's what I would recommend. It just helps the transaction go much faster and much smoother, and sometimes might even save you some money on it as far as the aircraft purchase itself, because you can tell the buyer, I'm already got my financing lined up. We can close, within the next 2 weeks, which is usually very attractive to sellers.
Okay, so come to the bank early.
Come to the bank early, get your financing lined up. Usually use a sample type of aircraft that you might be looking at or looking to purchase. So that's first and foremost. And I would tell you, secondly, you want to work with a really good aircraft broker, somebody that's got experience across all different manufacturers of aircraft. And typically, you want to work with one that's a pilot as well. They're going to get you back and forth to wherever you're going to look at an aircraft and then help you start going through that aircraft to make sure it's got all the bells and whistles that you want, and it will be able to fly the mission that you're going to be mainly using it for. That's the other thing you want to be looking for. You want to make sure that you're not going to have to land that plane 2 times before you get to where you're going to refuel the aircraft. You want to make sure that it's lined up with the mission of what you're going to be mainly using it for. So those are the 2 things I recommend up front. Get your financing in line, and then work with somebody that's very reputable, that's been around in this business for a long, long time.
Are there some types of aircraft that are better for financing than others? Does it matter?
It does matter. Well, I would tell you age is probably the biggest. The newer the aircraft, the better the financing packages that you're gonna see out there.
It's like anything.
As they get older, aircraft can be around for a long, long time. We see 1970 aircraft out there, but the engines have been maintained properly.
Okay.
Or a lot of times folks will put new engines on an aircraft as well because they love that airframe so much. They want to make sure they keep that, but they just put new engines on it.
Okay.
So biggest factor in financing, though, is the age of the aircraft.
Age, so it doesn't matter if it's a prop or a jet engine. I mean,
for the most part, no. Turboprops, you want to make sure it's obviously a turboprop, jet aircraft. Those financings are usually right around the same. Again, it's going to come right down to the age of the aircraft. Now, if you start getting off to experimental type of aircraft, crop dusters, stuff like that, that's a little bit different. But I would tell you that the aircraft, the Lears, the Gulfstreams, the Beechcrafts, those aircraft are generally all in line with the same type of financing.
Have you financed a crop duster before?
I have, actually. A $50,000. Actually, it went through a firm here in town here as well. There's a lot of crop dusters that actually get done here locally.
Now, we got a lot of ag in the area, which I know people don't necessarily associate with kind of Tampa Bay because we've got so much development here. But I mean, you go more to the center of the state and county and up north, certainly. I mean, there's a lot of agriculture.
There's a ton of it, and there's a ton of crop dusters get used on those. There's also Florida is very big on experimental type of aircraft as well. Because
so what does that mean? Like, what type of experimental aircraft?
So there's a lot of very, very small aircraft out there that people actually sometimes put these kits together and are experimental. So they're not approved by the FAA yet for flying. So you're going to fly this thing by yourself for the most part. A lot of times you're putting it together yourself as well. You bought a kit of some sort. And
so are they flying illegally? I mean, they have to be registered, right?
Yeah, it has to be registered, but it's not registered with the FAA.
Okay.
All right. So you're not.
So what does that mean? You can't land at an airport?
You're landing at private airports.
Okay.
You're landing at very small private airports, like an Albert Whitted would probably allow you in. Davis Island would probably allow you in there as well. But you have issues with insurance and financing on those. For the most part, nobody's going to insure you on that, and nobody's going to finance one of those things. But for some reason, very big on kit and experimental type of aircraft here.
It's Florida. Excuse me. It doesn't surprise me. We do everything's a little different here in Florida. What about typical terms, like money down, term, amortization? What can people expect?
So for the most part, I would tell you we're financing an 80% purchase. So brand new, say we're looking at a brand new aircraft, we're going to say 20% down on the aircraft and then we finance the rest. On a brand new aircraft, for the most part, you're doing a 20-year amortization, but with a balloon payment somewhere in the 5 to 7 year range. But then that amortization would stretch out over 20 years.
Okay, so almost like commercial real estate.
Exactly. The biggest difference, and transactions are handled almost very similar to the way we handle commercial real estate, except you're dealing with the FAA instead. So the registrations are being done in Oklahoma with the FAA, and then there's something called the IR, the International Registry, which you're registering as well, which is in Dublin, Ireland.
Okay, and you need to do both?
You need to do both on a jet aircraft.
Okay.
If it can fly international, anything outside the U.S. has to go into an international registry as well.
Okay. Is there any difference whether you intend to use it for personal or business travel?
The big difference is if you're going to use it for charter. If you're going to charter it out, then we look at it a little bit differently, because more than likely you're going to be putting on a lot more hours on that aircraft, and it's going to affect the values on the back end of it. So depending on if you're chartering it full time where you need that charter income, we may look at it a little bit differently and ask for more money down, because the value is going to come down a lot quicker on something like that. If it's only chartering just because you're for the tax advantage, then we look at it just as a straight regular purchase.
Okay. So you were talking about kind of older aircraft, and so in my case, that 1972 prop plane, and if someone wanted to drop a new engine into that, is that something that the bank finances too?
So not on that age of aircraft. Where I would tell you we'll finance avionics, we'll finance engine overhauls, we'll finance even a new engine if it's going on a mainstream aircraft, say a Gulfstream, a Lear, a Cessna, a relatively newer one. What happens is the aircraft have to go in, depending on how many cycles on those engines, has to go in for an overhaul. Every, say, 1,000 cycles on that engine goes in for an overhaul. Those overhauls are very, very expensive, but a lot of times you bring that in and you're going to say, you know what, I want to update all the avionics on this aircraft. I want to put in the latest and greatest in the cockpit. I want to be able to have satellite in the back, all this stuff. It adds up. It's very expensive.
I'm in.
and we'll finance all of that. So a lot of times the aircraft has to go down for a month because of that overhaul, and then you retrofit the cockpit with all the latest and greatest avionics.
Okay. So logbook reviews. Tell me about this.
So purchasing an aircraft, one of the big things that you want to do, first and foremost, we expect you to do an inspection of the aircraft along with an appraisal. It's very important.
Third-party inspection, right?
Third party. We'll go hire them for you, get you introduced to somebody to do that for you, and typically they're flying in and doing the inspection, and they're going to inspect the engine, the aircraft, the airframe, the avionics. And what's most important, or one of the most important things, they need to go through those logbooks. Depending on the age of the aircraft, we want to make sure that that aircraft never left FAA registration. So if all of a sudden the aircraft for several years was missioned down in Mexico, all of a sudden you've got logbooks of 2 years that are written in Spanish, and their standards may not be the same standards that we have here in the U.S. as far as maintenance on that aircraft. So it's extremely important you go through those logbooks and make sure that the maintenance was kept up at FAA standards the life of that aircraft.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, good advice. So like-kind exchanges. So in commercial real estate, we've got something that's a 1031 where you can kind of roll the purchase into the next one. Sure. I mean, there's something similar in aviation too.
There is. It's exactly the same. It's a 1031 exchange. A lot of times you go sell an aircraft, there's going to be some sort of tax hit that you might take. Years ago, aircraft kept going up in value, so you go sell that aircraft, you may have some taxes that you have to pay on that. Instead, you do a 1031 exchange. You have a certain amount of time to go find another aircraft that's very similar, a little increase in value of that aircraft, and you just keep kind of kicking the can down the road on that tax.
So what was happening in the market? Because every other depreciable asset, right? I mean, like a car, the moment you drive it off the lot, values decrease. So why were planes increasing in value?
The main reason was it's so long to get an aircraft. If you wanted to go buy a new G4 Gulfstream 450 right now, it's probably going to take you 2 years, maybe 3 years to get that aircraft. A lot of times the value's gone up before you even get that aircraft, and sometimes people even sell that aircraft prior to even taking ownership of it because values have jumped up so much.
Or just someone maybe will pay a premium so they don't have to wait the 3 to 4 months, right? You order it and then turn around and flip it.
Absolutely. Kind of like you do on brand new real estate, very similar to that. But for the most part, there was a period of about 10, 15 years where values were shooting up. But I have to tell you, 2008, 2009, during the Great Recession we had financed a $35 million G450. We watched it go down $10 million overnight.
Wow.
So you got to have a stomach for that business. Now, it came back nicely 6 months later, but there was a drop there, drastic drop there of $10 million virtually overnight.
So in the pandemic, everybody went out and bought a boat and a car and RVs. Did people go out and buy planes too?
There's been a big jump in plane sales over the last 2-3 years. There's been a couple aircraft that have really picked up in the last couple of years because the mission of them, the way you can use them is really helpful being here, especially here in the Southeast where air travel is very easy when you have a private aircraft. Pilatus builds what's called a PC-12. They started building these, I think, in 1991 as a competitor to the Beech King Air. You're probably familiar with the King Air. Been around forever. It's almost like the SUV of aircraft. Twin engine, turboprop, going to get you over the Bahamas, wherever you want. PC-12 is a single turboprop, so you got a lot less maintenance. You only need one pilot in there, and it can get you over the Bahamas. It can get you up to North Carolina very, very easily without stopping.
Okay. So when people buy aircraft, what is the typical time they hold on to the aircraft? Do they trade on a regular basis? Do they hold on to it forever?
Well, and that's why 1031 exchanges are available on aircraft. What we've seen on aircraft over the last 20 some odd years is the typical owner is trading up within 3 years on that aircraft. They want to move up to something that's maybe has a little longer range, a little roomier, that sort of thing. So 3 years on average is when somebody's turning an aircraft in and going to the next one. And we have prepayment penalties in all our loans when we do these aircraft loans. But if you upgrade and you keep the loan with us, we're not going to charge you that prepayment penalty. We're going to just roll everything into the new loan. You're probably going to end up doing a 1031 exchange. Obviously, we wouldn't charge you a prepayment penalty because you're keeping the loan with us, but on a different aircraft.
Okay. But so if they're selling outright to a third party or getting financing from someone else, we keep the prepayment penalty in place.
That is correct. But if you told me, Scott, I'm selling this aircraft, but I'm looking for another one, it may take me 3 or 4 months to find that aircraft, but I'm going to have you finance it again, the bank finance it again, we would gladly waive that prepayment penalty in a situation like that.
Okay, so it's just being flexible and providing some opportunity. But, I think the key to the prepayment penalty is we don't want to put in all the work just to have it all go away. Is that fair?
That's exactly right. And, on a fixed rate loan, depending on what rate's done, we could get hurt on that because we got to redeploy those funds at maybe a lower rate at that point. We just don't know what the environment is. So, yes. So for the most part, we're going to waive that prepayment penalty if you're keeping business with us. But yeah, we usually see aircraft owners trading up after 3 years on their aircraft.
All right, let's talk about the nitty-gritty. So the less sexy part of aircraft purchases, which is all the third-party paperwork. You mentioned the inspection, but what else do you have to do in order to get a loan for aircraft?
Well, I'll tell you, probably the hardest part and the most painful part is insurance. The insurance industry, when it comes to aviation, is just been upside down for at least 20 years now. So that's really the toughest part, and these brokers of aviation insurance all know each other. So if you were to go out today and call one insurance agent, get a quote, and then 3 hours later you call another agent, you're going to all of a sudden be frozen up in that market because they know you're just shopping the market. There's only a few companies that actually do the insurance itself. So dealing with multiple brokers is an issue. My recommendation is deal with one broker.
Fair practice issue.
If it was in our world, it would be. Yeah. But in the aviation world, all they do is they freeze that individual for several days until things settle down a little bit and they figure out exactly what they're going to do. Because again, in the end, there's like 3 companies that can finance or insure these aircraft. They're all going to be funneled down to the same companies at some point.
So work with one broker.
Work with one broker, but insurance and financing are extremely important to get lined up front and make sure you know what those costs are. You'll be able to get insurance depending on the age of the aircraft, but you need to know what the costs are going to be because they're probably going to be a lot higher than you estimated.
Okay. What about appraisals? How does that process work different from, and I keep coming back to commercial real estate because I feel like you're financing an asset, but yeah, I feel like there's some similarities.
There definitely is. So there's only a few folks out there around the country that go out there and inspect these aircraft, and they're all certified. There's a certification out there that they would have, and typically you're flying them in from somewhere. They're going to come sit in the aircraft and spend 6-7 hours, at least 6 or 7 hours inspecting the aircraft, everything about it, from the avionics through the engines, the logbooks, the carpet, you name it, making sure the seals are done properly, the window seals are up to snuff, and then making sure all the inspections have been done over the last life of whatever the life of it is that aircraft.
Any good horror stories in financing aircraft?
There's a lot of scamming that goes on in aircraft. There's a lot of folks out there that will try to sell aircraft to people that really shouldn't be buying an aircraft, but they have the wherewithal to buy that aircraft.
Okay.
All right. And why they do do that, they want to be able to have that on their charter certificate and make money chartering that aircraft. But what ends up happening is they just beat the heck out of that aircraft, put 300-400 hours on that aircraft, and now it's lost its value, and the market may have an issue selling that aircraft because it's got too many hours on it.
Okay, so they're just trying to sell me an aircraft just to put it in the pool.
Exactly. So they'll make money off of it. You're not using it the way you thought you would use it. So I've seen some terrible horror stories on that, especially when it comes to professional athletes are usually victims of something like that, where somebody will come to them and pitch them on, here's why you need to do this.
You're going to make money, right? Like, look, is this going to pay for itself? You'll make money, put it in the pool.
Absolutely. It's going to pay for itself. You're going to be using this all the time. You're flying down to the Caribbean on this thing, and then what happens, they're not using it anything like that.
And then you lose all the value.
And the value is gone when you go to try to sell it.
Okay. So outside of planes, other luxury purchases. So yachts, boats, equipment in the space.
Well, interestingly, a lot of folks that own a plane also own a big boat somewhere.
That would make sense.
So
people like their toys.
They love their toys. I like to refer to planes, though, as a business tool, not a toy, as we know. Chief credit officers don't always like to hear that term toy.
Right.
It is truly a business tool. Yachts can be configured the same way. They may be leaning a little bit more on the toy side, but we finance those here at the Bank of Tampa as well. And we've got a team that knows exactly how to do them, and we do them very well. But you're dealing with the U.S. Coast Guard. Instead of dealing with the FAA, you're going to make sure that it's registered with the Coast Guard.
Okay, but I mean, pretty much the same process in terms of evaluations, inspections, terms.
For the most part, yes. The asset collateral deterioration on a yacht is much faster than it would be on a boat, on an aircraft. Aircraft hold their value much longer and much better than it would on a yacht.
Okay, makes sense. Anything else you want to share with everybody?
Well, come to the Bank of Tampa. If you're thinking about purchasing an aircraft, we can help you out as far as finding an inspector, working with an insurance company, whether or not you need a 1031 exchange done on the aircraft. We can help you out with all those. We can help you out with looking at different types of manufacturers as well. We've got a lot of expertise in that as well. There's major differences between, say, a Gulfstream and a Dassault Falcon and a Challenger. They all have their missions, so it's really smart to think up front what you want to do with that aircraft and before you start shopping for it.
I appreciate it, Scott. Thanks for joining us. For everyone else, if you have a question or future show idea or would like to be a sponsor, send us a message at moneymarket@bankoftampa.com. You find us on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, and Instagram at Bank of Tampa and online at bankoftampa.com. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. Until next time, adios.